This episode is brought to you by DAS London, Blockworks' #1 institutional crypto conference where all the top institutions and people in crypto are going to be this March in London, what's becoming maybe the crypto hub of the world. I have a link in the show notes where you can learn more and also a discount code that will get you 20% off. So click the link, find out more, and I'll see you there. Welcome to another episode of Lightspeed. Today, we are joined by Kash from Superteam, where he helps Solana projects launch and also build their community. And we have Brandon from Framework, who largely focuses in the Ethereum community, but thankfully they have Brandon who focuses on Solana. So I'm excited to have both of you here.
Thanks for having us on, man.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. Good to be here, man.
Fun to have you. Looking out like from the outside in on this, it's like we have someone that works on community building and then an investor. And it's like, is that an odd duo to have together? But then you think for a second, like, what is crypto? And that's really the story is like crypto has this intrinsic link between finance and community. So that's why I think this is a really cool opportunity to get both your perspectives. And talking about stories, let's start with Solana's story, because I think it's a pretty unique one in the sense that Solana launched in March 2020. It got a lot of hype, got a lot of traction on the chain. Then there's like this endearing term called like chewing glass, which essentially meant like the chain wasn't really ready for all that adoption. So developers had to go through a lot of extra work. But then that term chewing glass kind of became a reality with the FTX implosion and then some of the network outages where it was actually like a punch in the teeth. So it went from chewing glass to getting punched in the mouth. But since then, you've seen the community come back even stronger. You've seen unique use cases come out. The SVM adoption has more like exposure and recognition than ever. If I saw another ecosystem go through like a simulation 100 times, I don't know if they have this type of comeback. So what do you think that Solana got right or that makes it unique that it's been able to do this? And Kash, maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, I think there's probably three things that come to mind here. So the first one is, in general, I think communities are remarkably resilient, and there's a way in which trauma kind of binds people together. So I think you see like a version of this, even like when ETH went down to whatever $80 or whatever it went down to 2 or 3 years ago. A similar thing where you kind of like you're put through the crucible. So a lot of people fall off, obviously, but the people who are left are even more engaged than they ever were before. So that worked, and thankfully the network did not go down at that period of time. So there was some hope and optimism that things would come back. I think the second thing that was done really smartly is Solana as an ecosystem has made a lot of efforts in investing in non-crypto degens, I think is one way to put it, like actually looking for mainstream use cases and looking to onboard more people who are normies. So a lot of the work we do at Superteam is in this vein, right? We're trying to find like normal developers that are kind of crypto curious and bring them over and show them what a good experience can look like. So I think not having that myopic focus on just like fighting over the same 15 whales and actually expanding the pie has worked out pretty well. And then finally, the truth is the tech is pretty good. We like the tech. And when you can do stuff like Drip House or when you can do stuff like TipLink that can actually like reach large numbers of people and give them a new experience they haven't had before, I think that ends up being a pretty nice tailwind that just kind of pushes you forward. So it's a mixture, I think, of like explicit choices that were made, fundamental features of the tech, and just generally like kind of the way the trauma brings people together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I go back to sort of an older quote, but I'm a fan of it. There's no such thing as bad press. And, you know, Solana benefited a lot, obviously, from sort of FTX, Alameda, just pushing things out on chain, on Solana. And, you know, for better or for worse, they became kind of the marketing arm, the PR arm. Like SBF was, you know, directly associated with Solana. We won't need to go into that today because I'm exhausted with that guy and like good riddance. But in any case, you know, he did serve a pretty healthy function for Solana awareness. And, you know, I think what's exciting to take stock of today is, you know, just yesterday on the recent run up across a number of assets in the market, we've basically retraced the sort of FTX Alameda, you know, liquidation bankruptcy process. So Solana, Sol, the community, the asset, you know, however you want to frame it, is definitely rounding a corner from, you know, kind of all of the downsides. And now the open question in my mind is like, did they just get a whole bunch of free upside and now they've weathered the storm on the downside? Narratives move, you know, extremely quickly. So, you know, I'm excited for the next few months, obviously breakpoints next week. So that's like a rallying point for the community. And yeah, I mean, what else can I say? Obviously agree with Kash, you know, the chain itself is performant and there are all sorts of builders who've stuck in there. And now you have this new sort of mentality of like SVM is best in class. Let's see if we can leverage this in maybe a different architecture. But in any case, folks are still building in and around Solana. And, when number go up, it just reinvigorates a whole bunch of folks who may have been either sidelined or started to get cold feet and look elsewhere. So, I think there's a whole bunch of positive, and, the past is the past, and and I'm happy to put it all there and kind of put a bookmark it and just move forward. So, yeah, I mean, other ecosystems, we've seen a whole bunch of Ethereum killers over the years. And, frankly, they were just kind of tokens with like a story. And like there were very few dApps or apps. The core teams weren't pushing out updates. They weren't going on pods like totally. They weren't pushing things out. They weren't, hosting hackathons with thousands of applicants. And, maybe they had conferences or events. I went to a few of them and, kind of hit or miss. But all that to say, there's a real story. There's a real community. There are credible people in and around Solana. And that, for me, separates the wheat from the chaff as it relates to maybe some of the former takes on, the quote unquote Ethereum killer.
Actually, that brings to mind one thing. I never thought about it this way until you just said that, Brandon, actually, which is shout out to SBF. There's a hot take right now.
Very hot take.
I think there's actually a way in which, because there was this kind of like premature demise of Solana, at least in the public eye, that was directly attributable to like one guy and one entity, that actually became a bit of like a rallying point, because, common values are really important for community building, but so are common enemies. And basically everyone on Solana had the same common enemy for a period of time, or at least like blamed the same people. And I wondered to what degree that actually made it easier for people to stick through this kind of traumatic event and all the turbulence that came afterwards. Because at the end of the day, everyone kind of agreed that we were all shaking our fist at the same guy. Obviously, shout out to SBF as a joke. I mean, fuck that guy. But like, there's a way in which like there was a silver lining to that cloud that actually I think helped enable the resilience of the community.
Totally. He'll go down, maybe at best as a footnote in some book that, folks may or may not read in 5+ years.
Books. He's in a few books already.
I mean, whether or not you read them, who knows? Hopefully they're better than some of the ones coming out thus far. But in any case, yeah, I think, that to me is what's fundamentally different about Solana versus some of the previous Altel 1 chains, if you will. I'll use that in air quotes.
Has there been something like a certain catalyst? Maybe this is after FTX. Obviously, we saw a lot of like tech upgrades. We've seen Visa's adoption with payments on Solana. Is there anything in particular that you've seen kind of like an exponential growth in either new projects in the ecosystem, or has it just been kind of slow and steady over time?
I think it's been largely slow and I think it oftentimes looks slow, or it looks exponential, excuse me, even though it is kind of like this slow and steady build because of like the work that we do at Superteam. We work with a lot of like unfunded projects, like really early stage. So we get to see these things kind of bubble up. But in particular, lately, you've seen just like this explosion of incredible payments companies that are delivering payments experiences like none other. And so that feels kind of like it's happening all at once. And so you look at companies like, Decaf, which now you can like off ramp in 184 countries using crypto, or TipLink in their gift card program, or Otter, or any of these different projects. And I think there's been like an explosion in these kind of payment providers, but there's been a lot of work that's been done on the regulatory side with projects like CoinFlow that enable on ramping and off ramping, a lot of kind of just like local community building to get governments on side. That has taken a while to build, so that you get this kind of explosion of innovation in payments, at least recently.
Yeah, I want to double down on that use case, actually, payments, because in some ways it feels like almost a Schelling point for the Solana community. Obviously, like the low fees and low latency are a big part of that. But I'm curious, like from a net new perspective, on something that Solana can do that Ethereum doesn't do today. Like, do you think that is payments? Like maybe it's DePIN. What is something that jumps out to you? Because it's always fun to like, oh, we can do this, but just faster. But if we really want Solana to do well and for the ecosystem to thrive, I feel like we need new use cases that are like almost specific or very unique to Solana. So I'm curious what you think those might be.
Yeah, I mean, double clicking on sort of the payments use case. Well, actually, let me step back for a moment and kind of frame Ethereum DeFi or DeFi to date, maybe in comparison or in contrast to Solana DeFi. Because I think that, the two are complementary, but are fundamentally different as well. And what I mean by that is, Ethereum is kind of going for this bulletproof security model. They're going for more of the settlement layer, more of the high value transactions, if you will. And that's fine, right? But with Solana, they're going for more of, like, to your point, high speed, low latency, performance, low cost. And so I don't mean to pit those against one another, but I think that they're starting on other, sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. And so that's a big part of why you see sort of Ether is money and, the ETH maximalism and all of that. Like that in a part is a part of the broader Ethereum community, because that is the security budget, if you will, to defend against all sorts of things coming on chain, whether it be treasuries, balance sheets, bond portfolios, you name it. You go to Wall Street, counterparty risk is predominantly denominated in liquidity versus technology itself. So that's one end of the spectrum. But shifting gears towards, Solana, for example, payments is a home run, I think. I think it makes total sense. And already, Sol is a part of a number of different trading pairs in something like, I think, 200 plus countries. I can't remember exactly where I read that, but maybe Kash has more on that. But in any case, that's very notable. That's considerable. And it makes sense. Payment rails need to be low cost. Let's just take, for example, someone who's living in, an emerging market, pick a country, and maybe you're living on $1 or $5 a day. You're not willing to lose any, of that to friction losses through gas fees or what have you. You just want to get your money, and rightfully so. And so that's why payments on Solana make sense, in my opinion. And, that is why, you see major banks, bond portfolios, treasuries, sort of the real world asset thesis. They're partnering with Ethereum, right? For the mentions that I mentioned, the reasons that I mentioned previously. Also, in addition, Ethereum kind of has the regulatory green light. That's another big part of it too, which you can't overlook. But that's why credit cards and payment processors are looking at Solana, because, they're two sort of fundamentally different value propositions. And the thing I would add is that, assuming Solana nails payments, which I think they have a really good shot of doing, that opens up, frankly, the entire consumer-facing application category. Because any, app you download on your phone, any game, you're looking for a simple, seamless payment solution. So that's kind of the Trojan horse into the consumer category is payments. So yeah, I mean, just to double click on that, I think that that's an excellent area to focus on and win. And there's all sorts of cool things happening there, whether it be mobile phone and hardware and some of the solutions as it relates to that, or just, on and off ramps, all sorts of accoutrement, if you will, in and around Solana payments.
$10 word.
Right. Yeah, I think I second everything you said there. And I think there's both on a technological level and in just kind of like a cultural or social perspective. I think you could divide the world into kind of like two camps, maybe. Let's see if this works. So like, and the one is where like crypto is really like the key focus, right? Let's call it like the coffee table. It's like, it's the main thing that's in the room. And so not only is it like the main thing from a technological perspective, ETH is money, but also from like a social perspective, apps that kind of foreground the crypto-ness of it are always going to do better, right? So you look at Curve or Uniswap, things that feel very crypto native. And there's another kind of camp, which we might call the carpet camp. Right. So a carpet, it ties the room together. It's an important piece of the room, but it's there as kind of a supporting function. It's not meant to draw the eye. It enables everything else that's there. And I think that Solana's tech really enables this, right? Because it's cheap and whatever else. But also there's like this kind of social agreement, the social consensus among builders on Solana, where it's like, hey, crypto is very important and it's very cool because it unlocks these use cases. But those use cases are only valuable to the degree that they create real value for real people in the real world. And I think that's another like exciting thing about Solana is not just that the technology can offer these new use cases, but people are thinking in ways that allow you to get these kind of innovative payments experiences or deepen experiences or whatever else. There's a bad rug joke in there somewhere, so I regret using the word carpets now. But like,
I was gonna say, if you guys can't tell from the analogies and also the numbered list, Kash is also a content creator that does a wonderful job. And while we're talking about content, just for 1 second, I'm curious, when you're making content, you're marketing Solana, I say Solana, like a lot of the projects in there, trying to get more attention to the ecosystem. What is something that's like easy with that? Like for Solana to be like, oh, I can really like people understand this. And then what is something that's hard? Like whether that's just a misconception that people don't get, or you're like, this is something that Solana really does need to improve on.
Yeah, so I would say first, I'm not very good at making content. So like everything I say right now, take with a grain of salt. But what is easy about talking about Solana? A lot of the content that I've made recently has been to kind of help energize the existing Solana community. I don't think either I or Superteam have done as good of a job on the content side at reaching like a wider audience. So for the content we've done, it's been pretty easy to be like, hey, Solana, pretty fast, huh? Pretty cheap, pretty good in those regards. What has been harder is to explain like why, or it's been harder to identify the areas of where things are going and explaining to people like why these kinds of things matter. There's a degree of like kind of philosophical buy-in that you have to put out there, like if you're doing, or that you need in your audience if you are making high quality content, I think. That is, it just like takes longer to develop. It's something that actually I think you and Mert have done like a spectacular job of with these like long form, really serious kind of interviews. The stuff we've been experimenting with is like short form content, written content to see if we can kind of mimic it. And oftentimes there's just not enough time to build that kind of new mental programming that you guys are able to do here. The other piece of content that I do is around like the ecosystem call, as we call it. So if you're watching this, you should definitely come out to that. It's once a month, where we like showcase a bunch of projects and talk about wins of the ecosystem and so on. That I think has a little bit more of a success rate just because people have more time to kind of buy into what we're talking about. And there it's really easy to get people excited because there's like big numbers and there's new projects launching that people just aren't aware of oftentimes.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not much of a content creator at all. In fact, I generate basically no content in terms of external facing. But I would echo the sentiment in terms of like Lightspeed's been an excellent just voice or like discussion to kind of highlight things in and around Solana. And, a big part of the reason I was stoked to come on and join you, Kash, as kind of co-guest is like, you guys have been just actively bullish on Solana. I've never wavered in that once. So I respect that. That shows integrity, But yeah, I guess just shifting gears and kind of answering the question in a different realm, what I would say is fast and cheap is 100% the value prop. And I think the last thing that Solana and Solana projects need to nail is easy. And what I mean by easy is just broadly, if you're a developer, I think a big part of the reason why folks migrate or start an EVM is just the educational suite, sort of the amount of public, goods and tooling, the dev tooling, just the broader tool chain. It's robust, and there's all sorts of folks available for mentorship, and there's much more collaboration. And that's not to say that remains so forever and ever. Definitely things have been improving in this regard on Solana as well. But I think that is sort of where the rubber meets the road in terms of just improving communication broadly and sort of content, right? Improving docs, sharpening up just like the edge cases, more of the blocking and tackling, kind of, frankly, the unsexy things. But to the extent you can win the easy communication point and people come in and actually validate it, then Solana really wins and broadens the top of funnel for net new folks and developers all over the world. And, for those who come in and are drawn in by the fast and cheap, if you can nail easy, boom, then they're in and they're building, and they're putting shots on goal, which is sort of the name of the game here, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I am curious with Solana's approach that is slightly different than Ethereum, at least at the L1 layer. Like the L2, obviously they're trying to go for like lower latency, cheap fees. Do you think we'll see different business models, or are you already seeing that come out of the Solana ecosystem? Because it makes me think of like Netflix. They have 2 to 3 tiers, but one of those tiers is a subscription tier that's maybe somebody who doesn't want any advertisements. And then they're actually pushing more of the advertisement tier now because they can get a wider audience that way. And I think one of Solana's selling points, and you talked about with emerging markets, is we can actually support these people who maybe couldn't, for example, pay that subscription, but they still want to use the product. So I'm curious with that, have you seen anything interesting just from a business model perspective, or how do you think Solana will go about that? Because it does feel different than like the whale theory that you have on Ethereum, and you only need a few players to really accrue a lot of that revenue.
I mean, I think the open question on all accounts for all changes, sort of like, how do token emissions translate over the long haul to a robust security market, right? And, I don't frankly have an answer to that, but a framework that I generally think through just mentally is I kind of, and this isn't necessarily novel, but it's been helpful for me. I generally cluster Ethereum and EVM and all of that as sort of an AWS. They're the first mover. They have the broadest reach and extensibility, a lot of flexibility, and again, a lot of dev tooling and just a lot of mind share. Folks are familiar with it. But then you also have, Solana, which I would cluster as more of kind of a Google Cloud or a GCP, which came into the game a bit later, but focused explicitly on servicing data intensive companies, right? Those who are just explicitly focused on throughput, latency. Some of the earliest users of Google Cloud who migrated over from AWS were in fact Netflix, and I believe Snap. You don't quote me on that. But the point is like these were more kind of user facing, consumer facing applications. And so, I think that AWS today still commands a premium in terms of costs. And folks generally start out there because it has just the most integrations. It's the easiest, it's like no one gets fired for going with AWS. But at the same time, you never talk with an app developer who is like stoked that they're only on one cloud provider. Like the name of the game now is to be multi-cloud from day one, right? And so I think that we're in for maybe a few more years of folks kind of rallying around their religion to an L1 or a particular chain or a virtual machine or what have you. But really the end game, in my opinion, that all comes out in the wash. And maybe, Ethereum remains, as I mentioned, the higher cost, but more secure environment for higher value transactions. And maybe Solana is, the fast, cheap, and easy for more consumer facing applications. And maybe there's an element of advertising or everything becomes a loss leader to some back end service like business. So yeah, I keep an open mind to it, but I think those are some of the threads that I generally pull on as it relates to how they may wind up with similar looking business models, but different sort of takes on them and implementations.
Yeah, I wonder, I don't have a clear sense of like where the business models go. I do feel that there's a bit of like almost like a B2B SaaS pricing model, like business model that's emerging on Solana because there's like a lot of transactions and a lot of users. Like I look at Famous Fox Federation, they have this lottery or this raffle product that people might have seen that I don't know if they're public exactly how much they're making, but it's, it's more than six figures. It's quite substantial. They're making like real revenue every single month. And I think that model is really interesting. I think, frankly, we haven't had as many tokens on Solana as you've seen in the EVM world for a bunch of different reasons. And as a result, we haven't had as many experiments on like what tokenomics are uniquely enabled by the kind of architecture that Solana has. So I know there's a bunch of teams that are looking to launch tokens in the next few weeks or the next few months. So I think we'll have a better answer maybe like 6 months from now. But broadly, I think like you can do kind of SaaS-like business models on Solana in a way that I think would be harder to do on EVM or L2s, although low conviction on that idea.
Right. Just to add, as I think, a bit more clearly now on it too, is like maybe EVM winds up as more of an AUM mentality-like business, and Solana winds up as more of, monetizing attention and or eyeballs. Maybe not. Maybe those are, carried, weighted terms for some folks, but just trying to paint the picture in terms of what I think right now, at least.
I love all the analogies in this conversation because, sometimes in a debate, analogies kind of suck. But I think when you're trying to introduce people to new concepts or explore like what could be, it's extremely useful. So that was a very like financial heavy question. And when we started, we talked about crypto as like finance and community. So I do want to talk about community and messaging a little bit. Kash, this may have been back in like 2021, I'm not sure. But you said that community UX is just as important or more important than user UX or UX in crypto. Yeah. So what do you mean by that? And like, why do you say that?
Yeah. So first of all, excellent segue there. That was class act right there, and excellent research as well. I got to say, you caught me off guard there a bit. Yeah. So I think at the time where I think a lot of crypto founders are actually building kind of 3 products simultaneously, right? So they're building a high technology product, of course, which is like the actual protocol that they're building. The second product they're building is a social product, which is like the community that accompanies their technological product. And then finally, they're building a financial product, which is their token, obviously. And so I think even now, you see the value of community. It's kind of like this inbuilt like immune system for your product. It's great for getting feedback. It's great for actual product development and talent sourcing and blah, blah, blah. And so from that perspective, the community ends up mattering a lot to successful crypto projects. Whether it's more important than UX, that might have been a little bit of a spicy take for Twitter. I don't know. But it's I do certainly think that it is underrated, surely, relative to UX, which I think there are, hundreds of books written about UX, and people spend a lot of time thinking about it and not so much time thinking about the member experience and the kind of experience you're designing for the people that are in and around the products and protocols that you create. And the more kind of community oriented your product becomes, the more important that member experience becomes, because oftentimes those are the evangelists, those are the diehard users, those are the people who will stick around, when shit gets tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think in crypto, your community and your users are kind of one-to-one, at least in the early stages, right? And to Kash's point, you want to enable those folks, the evangelists, the folks who are doing any number of things to help just the community and or the protocol or whatever the application or product sort of looks like. Maybe you have folks in there, frankly, just answering FAQs. Maybe you have others actively going door to door, more boots on the ground and like doing kind of guerrilla marketing for you. Maybe you have more technical folks kind of looking through repos and pointing out flaws or edge cases. Like it kind of depends, but the point is you want to reward those folks and keep them incentivized. And, frankly, that is the tough part about crypto is we kind of start out super small, scrappy startups, under-resourced and allocated. Whether or not you have a token, I mean, most folks kind of have a token or it's implicit that a token is, coming soon trademark. But it's just like, how do you kind of direct that army? How do you, focus them on the things that are the most value, produce the most value or, have the highest leverage? And then how do you curate who's sort of legitimate, who's actually doing the most important things? How do you sort of stack rank that over time? And I think that, to Kash's point, to the extent that you can nail down some form of a process or at least communicate up front what you're sort of looking for or what sort of feedback loop you're looking to incentivize, that's basically free call options on your success. And so you want to enable that. And that's something that's uniquely enabled by crypto. And that's a big part of the reason why, crypto is going to overtake anything and everything Web 2 and Web 1 on a long enough time horizon, because people can actually get involved and be rewarded for doing so in a number of different ways, not just purely financial and a token every single time, right? A lot of it's social as well. Or maybe it's just getting educated and getting a job and like, climbing the ladder, so to speak. So, community UX, super important. And then a lot of times, I mean, I've seen a number of folks just kind of call it blasé or put it low on the priority list. And it comes back to bite them later on when maybe a competitor emerges who's done a much better job.
So when I heard you say that crypto will, take over a lot of what is Web 2 today, sometimes when I hear that, it kind of makes me like, honestly, like, man, that sounds almost kind of cringe. But by that, so I think it's like, how do you define that? And how do you define how crypto will be part of it? Because I even think this way in app chains, like only a small part of apps today are like, yes, you have the back end and you have the code, and a lot of that code wouldn't even be on chain anyways, but like payments might be, and like the NFTs might be, for example. But like crypto is even outside of cryptography and being on chain. To me, it's so much about communities as well, right? Like, it's really hard to say like crypto is going to take over Twitter. Like to me, I don't really see that happening, but is it more, do you see Twitter maybe eventually integrating some of these features that crypto has? Or what do you think that future is between Web 2 is today and where it will be?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a point worth clarifying. I'm not saying like we're going to go out there and kind of vampire attack the world as an industry.
There we go.
Yeah. But I mean, fundamentally Web 2, every company is kind of a blitzscaler. Every company is sort of a loss leader, zero interest rate phenomena. It's a two-sided marketplace. And that's not to discount all the things that have been built. Like, I'm not trying to sound like a fatalist and, cancel Web 2 by any means. But what I meant by my earlier comment is Web 3, or however you want to phrase it, it's just the natural evolution of what comes next. In certain niches or in certain, sort of use cases, I think that it'll take over more rapidly than people think. But in others, maybe it's Twitter, or maybe it's something completely different. Maybe it's a more of an incremental, not necessarily takeover, but maybe folks just start to adopt some of the things that our industry is pushing out there. And it's more of a conversation and kind of a convincing sort of thing. Or maybe users start to demand it. Maybe transparency starts to become demanded from users. Or maybe governments who are now cracking down on all of these Web 2 folks because they basically shove everyone's data in some unprotected database somewhere in the quote unquote cloud, and no one's responsible for anything, frankly. There are all sorts of societal issues that I think are going to, push the envelope here. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, everything's kind of been a blitzscaler, loss leader, just get the users, we'll figure out how to monetize later. And in Web3, the mentality is very different. In some respects, we kind of financialize immediately, and, there's pluses and minuses to that. But to the extent you're actually thinking about, cool, how do we actually get to a break-even point from sort of maybe a token issuance relative to income or fees generated or other business models, a big part of the conversation across the industry are those topics. Whereas in Web 2, it's like just scale, 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 get users, land grab, acquire. And we'll figure out how to monetize later. So yeah, I think that, it's not necessarily, again, about taking over or like vampire attacking everything. I just think that broadly, society is due for an upgrade. Our tech stacks are due for an upgrade. Clearly, regulatory and legislative, all of that's due for an upgrade. And Web3 is going to be integral to all of it.
Yeah, I think I have a general belief that it takes a long time to kill things. And generally killing like legacy industry is pretty tough. Like I look at like newspapers. There's still people reading newspapers. It's been whatever 20 plus years since that was like effective technology for like understanding the current events and what's going on around you. And it sticks around. I would imagine a similar thing will happen over time, that like to the degree that Web2 giants are killed, it'll be a long and slow process that ends with a whimper rather than with a bang. I also think the markets are really effective at creating these kind of like survival of the fittest dynamics, where like Web2 conglomerates will be able to pick up parts of Web3 and integrate them into their current offerings in a way that allows them to survive for longer. When I think about crypto broadly, and I think I'm paraphrasing this from Polynia, but I think like Web3 and crypto are really good for two things mostly, right? It's like objective money and it's objective identity, or it's payments and it's provenance. And so to the degree that there are Web2 giants that have business models that are built around payments or provenance, then I think there's going to be like a real need to integrate. And for the ones that have less of that, maybe less so. So I'm not sure. I think that the future will be kind of a fusion more so than, era Epoch 1 and Epoch 2.
Yeah, I mean, when we classify Web 1 and Web 2, it's all kind of revisionist history.
Yeah.
To Kash's point, there are these eras where everything's mixing together and intertwined, and a lot of sales and marketing folks kind of come back and staple over the top, like this was the end of this era and this is the start of this era. But no, I mean, on the ground, it's much messier. And but in any case, the point is there are all sorts of things that this industry has yet to take on that will take place in the next decades.
Yeah, no, I really like those answers. Quick break from the show to tell you about DAS London. Look, I don't really give investment advice, but I'm going to do it here. This investment gives you a real world experience in London. Yep, a trip to London. You're going to meet some of the smartest institutions, people, and builders in the space. Third is you actually get to listen to these people as well, because there's going to be over 60 speakers at this event. And fourth, most importantly, of course, we get to hang out. I'm talking about DAS London, which is Blockworks' biggest and best institutional conference that's happening this March in London. The big institutions are starting to realize that crypto is here to stay, and they're actually leaning into the space. From BlackRock to Visa, we're seeing it all. It's a 2-day in-person event. Like I said, over 60 speakers. It's a killer lineup. But more than that, like what's most important to me is the people you get to network with and meet. Like you might collaborate with these people, whether you're a project or maybe you're looking to work in the space. You might work for one of these people or just learn from them. Like it's really great to meet these people, and this gets everyone under one roof. So I'm a huge fan of this conference. I'm going to be there. Check out the show notes. I provided a link where you can learn more, and also a 20% discount code. Yeah, 20% off the ticket. These tickets do go up every single month, so that's why I would sign up now. The code is Lightspeed20. That's Lightspeed20 again. That's in the show notes. Make sure to use it so they know I sent you, and you'll get that discount. All right, I hope to see you there. Now, let's get back to the show. I'm curious, what do you see, just to touch on Solana a little bit more, just because you're both deep in that ecosystem, what is maybe coming around the corner, or what are you excited about that's coming up either in the next few months or year, just for people, especially that are new to the community? And I think Solana, even over the last year before that, weren't really good at putting like, for example, like at Superteam, putting like what's going on out there into Twitter, or writing like long docs, for example. We were talking to John Charbonneau, and he said like one reason, like when I came to crypto, it was inevitable that I went to Ethereum, because that was where like all the deep research is. And if you're someone that's either, walking into techish way or want to understand crypto economics, like that's where the experiments were happening. I think people are drawn to that. And so now that I think there's a real push in the Solana community to say, like, we want Solana to be the default ecosystem that you actually check out when you come to crypto. Like it should be there. It should be easy to access. So I'm just curious, if you were going to put some of those points out there of what you're excited about and what someone should look into that's joining the ecosystem, what are some of those things? And Kash, let's start with you.
Yeah, so sound like a broken record here, but I think payments is great. I think that like the UX is only getting better and better, and in particular, the on and off ramping is kind of a solved problem. And I think this is not something that's known to a lot of kind of casual crypto people or people who've been in crypto for a while and are like remember just like the absolute horror of trying to get money on chain. Actually, super easy right now. Like anyone here can go download Code Wallet or Spling or any of these companies, and it feels like Venmo. And there are the kind of just like basic network effects that start to happen in payment networks. Like as I send a friend some money on Venmo, now he's got some crypto already, and then you can just do all sorts of different things. So I think seeing more people use these kind of Web 2 UX styled apps is going to be awesome. I'm really excited about people earning in crypto as another way to kind of like default on-ramp into crypto. Deepin, I think, is one that's been talked about a lot and makes a lot of sense. I'm particularly excited for Deepin in kind of like the refi areas or areas where it's kind of serving generally underserved populations. Like one concrete example here, there's a project out of India called Albedo that's very early stage, like very, very early stage. But the guy himself is a farmer. His family are farmers in India. And he knows that crop insurance is a massive pain. Filing a claim just takes a long time. They always try to give you the least amount and so on and so forth. And he realized that, using a Deepin infrastructure, using some IoT devices, you can actually just measure rainfall and automatically disperse crop insurance payments based on if there's too much rainfall or too little rainfall or whatever else. And I think that's going to be a really exciting way of generating like real value for real people all over the place in underserved markets. Atlantis DAO is another one that's doing cool things here. So those two, I think I'm super excited about. And then broadly, I think you're starting to see more games come online, which has been fun. I'm not like a huge gamer, but the games that I've been seeing, I think are going to be crazy. Like you look at Star Atlas, which is doing some significant percentage of like all daily transactions on the Solana network. And those AAA games, they just take a long time to build. And so they've been building for the last 2 or 3 years. And I think they're going to start to roll out over the next 12 months in a way that's going to bring a lot more energy and attention to the ecosystem.
Yeah, I was going to start with kind of the energy and attention side. And frankly, something that I'm noticing in real time is just frankly, Solana founders just having a renewed sense of pride and like, not again to revisit SBF and all of the nonsense there, but folks were kind of socially in like a foxhole for the broader part of, the last 6-9 months, if you will. But now everyone's, out and about and walking around in pride and like, Lightspeed's been a big part of that. Mert, Kash, all sorts of folks have been out there actively just, supporting their thesis, highlighting what they're doing, pushing out more work. And I think that, you went back to like, why did John Sharp go into Ethereum when he first joined the space? Because there's content to devour. There's things to learn. There's educational content. Sort of going back to my earlier point in terms of like fast and cheap is cool, but where's easy? To the extent that the community can rally around making things easy and not just pushing out dev tooling and more of the technical stuff, but also just like an educational suite of things that people from all sorts of walks of life in all sorts of different languages and localizations as well can come in and engage with and then start to participate and take place. And I think, to Kash's point, like Deepin's a super fun one. I'm excited to see how some of those pan out. Whether or not there's like this soul wealth generation effect will perhaps be a major catalyst in that realm. We're super excited, and I'm super excited about games. Like it's not clear to me that one chain or one environment or one instance or implementation just wins all games. I mean, you look at the gaming industry, there's all sorts of different hardware, all sorts of different genres, gameplay styles. Some folks explicitly focused on the highest end, lowest latency stuff. Others just playing on mobile, Candy Crush, etc. And, I think that is it's just such a large market that it's going to happen on all sorts of different chains. And so I think that Solana, with its sort of advantage, in my opinion, in emerging markets, that lends itself very well to maybe more of the fast casual mobile genre, just in particular. But yeah, I think, broadly, we're also seeing DeFi kind of reinvigorate itself. And just a recent example, a teammate highlighted to me yesterday was, Phoenix for a certain point in time yesterday had higher liquidity on Sol pairs than Binance. I mean, that's a huge unlock. If you can, unseat Binance as price discovery for not just SBL tokens, but others, I mean, boom, there you go. That's a massive market. So I think there's all sorts of things that the industry and Solana as a community is looking at and taking on. And my main challenge to folks is like, just keep going. Like, try all sorts of different things. Start throwing shit at the wall in terms of these hackathons and directing folks to, try all sorts of more creative, different things versus like, an incremental improvement on something that's already been and done. Not to say that that's not important, but I think if you're coming in via a hackathon and you want to learn, you're best directing your energy at something totally new. I call it running down a dark hallway with a flashlight. You don't know where you're going, but the process is super informative. And so, yeah, I think that's where I would generally focus folks on sort of what they need to do.
Nice. I love that. Okay. So we've said a lot of nice things about Solana, and for good reason. It has a lot going for it. And, a lot of people are talking about on Twitter how Solana is non-consensus. And, I think this started, if you said Solana is like the community that you should look into back in December when everything was crashing and we had the outages and FTX, I think you kind of deserved like, hey, you did catch that early. I think at this point, like when people are on Twitter being like Solana is non-consensus, calling it now, I'm like, you're probably a little bit late to that. Like, the tech's there, the community is there, et cetera. So we can also give reasons on like how they're trying to improve on this, but I wouldn't call it a Solana roast, but let's just talk about a few things maybe you think the community needs to improve on, because let's be real, like no community is perfect, right? And I haven't even thought of my answer yet, so I wasn't prepped for this. I just think it'd be a good little segment to have. So does anybody have anything they want to run with?
I got a few if you're trying to get me in trouble. Yeah, I got a few ideas. So I think one thing that historically Solana has not been good at is that there are, at least it feels like this to me, there are two kind of camps. And one camp is like all like the DeFi and like the hardcore builder people, quote unquote, even just calling them that is a little bit derogatory to the next group. Hardcore builder people, we'll call it. And then there's like NFT people on the other side, right? And the truth is Solana was obviously set up initially to be all about DeFi and now has like expanded much beyond that. And there are these two groups that don't seem to talk that much. And they actually seem to not think very highly of each other as well. Like, so there's this weird kind of like inter-community battle or intra-community battle that we're feeling right now. And I think that that's something that I would love to see get resolved like in the near future because it's super annoying and unnecessary. I think there's also a large culture of entitlement along a lot of Solana users who, because they have stuck through the bear, feel as if everything in the world kind of belongs to them. I can talk about specific examples if that's useful, but like the general feeling that some people have, like, well, hey, because I've stuck it through, I deserve a gold medal. I think can get on my nerves sometimes. Outside of that, the last thing I'd say is, in general, I think Solana is quite good as a community at focusing on like actual product usage. But generally, there's a default to blaming the Solana Foundation or Solana Labs for not doing enough. And I think that's pretty counterproductive. I think that Solana Foundation is not perfect. No foundation is perfect, but it's not as if every ill can be solved by like one centralized entity. So a lot of people not taking kind of responsibility for the future of the network.
Those are good.
Yeah, I think my main recommendation rather than criticism would be to just stop trying to map one-to-one, apples to apples to what has been built thus far or worked thus far in Ethereum, especially as it relates to DeFi. I think that is a tough battle to try and go for, X asset is a money and we're doing, sort of the same implementations, but it's faster and cheaper. It needs to be something generally net new or 1,000x better. And, maybe I'm mistaken and Solana gets to 1,000x better on every single experience. That's an unknown in my book, frankly. But I think that, it best behoove founders and folks building in Solana to, as I was saying earlier, start running down new hallways, dark hallways, do net new things. Do the things that Ethereum or EVM cannot do. You have a moment in time now where you can arbitrage the Ethereum roadmap. And Ethereum can't go as fast because, again, it has a ton of liquidity and moneyness and a bunch of assets that need to be secured. They're kind of re-architecting and rebuilding and redesigning a jet in flight, whereas Solana is a little bit closer to the ground. And so you can kind of move quicker. And so I would just say leverage that ability to move quickly and arbitrage and do so in a lower cost environment. I mean, the consequences aren't as high. And so the risk reward is very skewed into your favor. And so I think that's my main thing. I see folks kind of, just waiting for Sol to become money and everything's Gucci after that happens. And it's like, hey, I'm not saying that won't happen. All sorts of things happen in crypto. I'm not surprised by hardly anything anymore. And maybe Sol becoming money is like market beta. Cool. Your job is to go out and generate alpha, right? And maybe you win by way of just being exposed to the beta and all of these sort of things panning out. But I would say don't sit back and wait for that to happen. You have a finite amount of time to leverage, the arbitrage that I was highlighting.
Yeah, there's some overlap with your thoughts as well, both of you. One thing I really don't like out of the Solana community, but this is every community, is when it's like for Sol to do well, it's like Ethereum can't do well. And at this point, like Ethereum could go up 100 times in value, and so could Solana. And like that's a very positive outcome for Solana. So like there's no reason. I know it's because we were trying to capture attention, and that means like people should think Ethereum is bad. So just look at Solana. But it's like, to me, that's kind of like short-sighted at this point. Like obviously point out the flaws and so forth. But I don't think that's really needed. And Kash, on your point about, Solana started as NASDAQ on chain, and then you had this like NFT experience that started in 2021, and it's almost trying to find its identity. It's like Ethereum is very much DeFi. I am curious to see where Solana goes. I think in the long run, and I'm sure you agree, it's really cool to see diverse use cases, and that makes the chain also more stable because you could have a bear market in DeFi, but you may not in NFTs or gaming or something else. And so I think it makes it healthy, but I think it's hard to know because, and Brandon, you were talking about unique use cases on Solana, like CLOBs, central limit order books on chain, something you can't really do on Ethereum is something you do on Solana. And like those projects are killing it, like Ellipsis Labs. And that's awesome. But like, that's not going to bring in, that'll bring in maybe professional traders, but it won't bring in like the retail user, someone like me. So then you have to have either these NFT projects or these games. And like, when people are thinking Solana, to me, it's like, you can only have so many words in your mind to describe what something is at this point, because it's such a new ecosystem. So I think it's like Solana, like what is your thing? And some people are pushing the consumer chain, like consumer applications. Is that something that like you resonate with? Do you see that as being maybe how you would describe Solana to somebody?
Yeah, actually, I in the works right now. I have a video called "Solana is the consumer chain," so I'm hoping that we all agree that that's true. But yeah, I think it's a useful and helpful framing, particularly as you look to expand into audiences, right? Like I think that if I think about like my cousins, right, or like my friends from college or whatever, at this point they have such a bad taste in their mouth, like from crypto, like just as a financial product, that I think you kind of have to like divert attention or refocus attention on other things that are easy to use. So when I look at projects like Pico Play, which is like this like daily chess challenge, or Drip House is a perfect example right here, just giving out literally millions of digital collectibles to people for free. Those kind of like consumer friendly things, I think, are where the future of the chain is going to be. And it actually kind of can help infuse all the other sectors as well. Like when I look at DeFi, again, I'm not a DeFi expert, but central limit order books are more user friendly than AMMs, where mostly you have impermanent loss and mostly LPs lose money, right? Not always, but generally. Or if you look at NFTs, where like, when they're much more expensive, when you're paying, whatever, $100 just for gas fees to buy an NFT that is then going to go down 99%, not particularly consumer friendly, right? So there's a lot about Solana that enables it to be consumer friendly, even outside of literal consumer apps.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying earlier, who else is kind of going for that class of developers and applications? It just feels like it's a no-brainer to go after the consumer category. And whether or not you brand the entire ecosystem and movement and chain and everything is that, TBD, because you're also going to need DeFi and other things. And, you need a full stack, you need a full vertical stack. And, that's not to say avoid certain things and like explicitly focus on those. But, earlier it was highlighted that a big part of what made Solana was not necessarily DeFi, but NFTs. And it was kind of flow over from ETH block space that made it approachable for mainstream, and it went bananas. And that's just one data point to suggest that, that was trading JPEGs and kind of just a fun social phenomena. Where can that energy and or that mentality be applied to other avenues? I mean, I think the options are rather endless. So just want to steer folks, again, probably sound like a broken record, but in that sort of vein of thinking, like just start taking shots on new things. And a big part of it too will just be a function of, again, how well the documentation and the educational resources and the public goods kind of come up to speed to support folks who don't want to get into the nitty gritty and understand like, oh, cool, there's this runtime, there's this consensus. Here's sort of like the token issuance schedule and all of this stuff. Like if you're building apps for consumers, your life's hard enough. It's hard enough to build a consumer app that gets to a successful level, right? That's a very tough business. So you don't frankly have the bandwidth, time, or resources to all of a sudden be a technical expert in crypto as well. So there's kind of a multitude of things that need to take place. But yeah, assuming those public goods and the broader educational resources get up to speed there, then folks can come in and just start building cool things. And whether or not they know explicitly what's blockchain and what's not, sort of TBD. But I think that is a huge market, and one that no one's captured yet.
Yeah. And I think the point earlier about payments makes that so important, because that almost underpins every experience on top, where a consumer can come in, hopefully get paid. You're talking about cash getting paid out on chain. I've talked about this like 3 times on the podcast. Like people used to pay me in Venmo. I never connected my bank account for like 6 months, but I started using the app because of that. And I think crypto needs something similar. We did touch on this a bit, but Brandon, you lead, I think, emerging markets over at Framework. Kash, you've done quite a bit of work, I think, probably in multiple markets, but maybe India in particular. Is there anything else that you want to touch on from maybe emerging markets or like not the US? Because I don't think we've had a single episode actually on Lightspeed yet where we've covered anything.
Yeah, sure. So I have, so I got into crypto in whatever, like 2016, but I didn't actually start working in the industry until 2021. And basically the entire time, my core thesis was that crypto is largely an emerging market story and will largely continue to be, because like the value proposition of crypto is like objective money and its objective identity, really works best in low trust environments. And unfortunately, a lot of these emerging economies are low trust environments. And I think you see this actually borne out by the data, by the way. Chain Analysis just did like a really nice report that people should go check out. The only segment of countries where adoption is still at 2020 levels, basically before the last bull run, is what they call like lower middle class countries, right? That's your Indias, that's your Nigerias, and so on. Everywhere else, adoption is even lower than it was at the beginning of the last bull run, right? Because the key value prop is not actually there. So you see this in multiple different ways. Like one is in places like Argentina or in Venezuela, where you have massive amounts of inflation. You just need crypto as a way to kind of preserve your wealth. In countries like Mexico, remittances are incredibly important, and remittances is a gigantic industry that is filled with fees unless you use USDC on Solana. And so all of a sudden, you can save all this money for, as Brandon mentioned before, people where those marginal differences really are a big deal. And then finally, you see a lot of these emerging markets gravitating to crypto because of this kind of cultural vibe that we have, where it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what your credentials are. We want to see what your proof of work is. Like, how can you perform? And so that ends up attracting a lot of talent that is kind of sick of the idea that, I need to pass this test or go to this university or whatever else. So indeed, Superteam started in India. Now we're live in 9 markets, I think. It's constantly growing. But even just within India, we have all of these stories of like literal teenagers who just started developing. They would make some Discord bots or whatever. They end up getting a small grant that leads to a job in the industry. That leads to them making more money than their parents. And that leads to like this degree of sovereignty and financial freedom that allows them to focus on what their true passions are. For people who are interested, we actually made an entire documentary about this called Superteams that should be coming out roughly around the time that this podcast comes out, where we detail some of these stories, and really show like the family and human element of it. But just to revert to the basic point here, emerging markets are where a lot of the value is, and it's where a lot of the people on the ground see the value as well. So that's where a lot of our efforts are focused.
Yeah, I mean, I would mirror that sentiment 100% in terms of low trust environments are kind of the entire target market of, blockchains, crypto rails, again, however you want to name it. The other thing too, just to highlight and maybe just to step back, quickly, is I've led a lot of our emerging market coverage here at Framework. Selfishly, I love to travel and just see what's going on around the world. But frankly, I think that all of the cool stuff, the fringe use cases, the edge cases, the user behaviors, you get those data points by getting out of what, I frame in the Western world as we're all spoiled. We're just drowning in abundance. Life's good. Our currency's rock solid. There's a law to protect property rights, et cetera, et cetera. You go to other parts of the world and, those things are not taken for granted because they're just not true. And if you look at crypto to date, a large part of what we've done is allow for tokenization, the trading of such, and stablecoins. And stablecoins are frankly the best vehicle on the planet for folks to get access to US dollar savings. Savings is a huge part of it. You go to any country around the world where, I know the inflation narrative's talked about a lot, but you need to go and get boots on the ground and just understand how are folks dealing with inflation? Because not every country is the same. They're not like, just get me out of the local currency. Like their entire markets and economies run on just how a local currency and their user base sort of get in and around this and survive. And crypto via stablecoins, plays a very huge role in that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, in my opinion. And so I like just going around and seeing what are folks doing? What's sort of the fringe behavior? What's practical? What's pragmatic? What's affordable? What's performant? Because those things are essentially R&D labs or, small petri dishes, if you will, for what will come home and take root here and work here as well. And so, I think that the emerging market use cases are often kind of miscategorized or overlooked, or everyone kind of waves a hand at it. And it's like, oh, it's purely an inflation hedge, or, it's this or that or whatever. But, when you're down there, it's a human story. It's a human interest story. And you're understanding, how are people surviving and just looking to improve their condition? How are they looking to get access to education, a job? And, the other part of it too that I would highlight is crypto, by way of being open source, is an excellent job economy for folks all over the world. It's a massive meritocracy. You don't need credentials to get involved here, but go look at some bug bounty platforms. Go just take part in, any number of open source communities, get involved. And frankly, you can make money doing so. And that's a huge positive feedback loop and bolster to the entire crypto market by way of finding talent in emerging markets. So yeah, I think the union there is, it's just getting started, frankly.
It was a beautiful answer from both of you guys. That was good. I love when I ask a question and then the answer is way deeper than what I expect. It's always a great moment on the podcast. Okay, let's see. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything that I definitely wanted to cover with you guys. I don't know if we should talk about it, but I did just find it interesting. It was like many of us simultaneously overestimate how many people are familiar with Ethereum and underestimate how powerful a simple soundbite like eco-friendly can be. But it's like sometimes crypto is pictured as like, and I say this often, like you need to have like a 10 times better product. What's the better product? And it's like something as small as eco-friendly can literally change someone's buying behavior. And it's like, what does crypto need to do there? Like, what's the crypto version of that?
People are just still not familiar with what this industry is and what these assets are and what these communities are. And I'm seeing that, I'm just being reminded of that daily by way of these ETFs and like all these legal filings and folks still like figuring out like what's proof of work, what's proof of stake, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, cool. I thought we moved on from this from like 2017 plus. But I don't know if there's like anything spicy or sexy that I would have to say per se. It's just more of like, even with my folks, they hear like, oh, I heard Ethereum's now eco-friendly. Like that's probably good, right? And it's like, yeah, probably, So I think it just goes to highlight the discrepancy between the things and the conversations that we have internal to the industry and then what just the everyday, layperson thinks about it.
I wouldn't call it a spicy take. I would call it like like a mild chipotle take here, where my new thing is that my hope is that in 5 years, people don't care about eco-friendliness people should care about eco-friendliness, but not as it relates to blockchains. Yeah, that's a little bit too hot of a take. No, but the actual idea is in 5 years, I would love for no one to actually know what Solana is, and for Solana to like fade entirely into the background of applications that people are using. And what I mean here is that like every builder, not what I mean here is that many builders should consider using like sign in with Google and just use like normal Web3 auth or whatever. And when it comes to payments, use Crossmint so that people can use a credit card and don't even expect them to have USDC. And when it comes to your marketing materials, don't even mention things that are around like Solana specifically or crypto to the degree that it's possible. And really moving away from this kind of obsession that a lot of people who are in the industry have right now, like, look how cool and shiny this tech is, and allow it to just be an enabling technology, going back to that kind of like coffee tables and carpets idea. I'm curious what you guys think of that.
I agree. To me, it always comes down to like, we need to identify who our target audience is before we kind of start talking. Like if we're talking to developers and engineers, it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to need to talk about the chain, just like we do AWS, GCP, Azure, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're talking to just a user, like they don't care what the back end of their, front end app or experience is built on. They just want like that which works, is secure, won't rug them, et cetera, right? They just want something that works, and or their friends are on it. Like, Garrett, you use the Venmo analogy, right? Like they just want something that has network effects and makes their life easier. They're busy, they're going to work, they're doing life. What makes my life easier? That's kind of the whole point of technology, right? What improves my condition? So yeah, I mean, I think that we'll always be having the conversation sort of on the back end engineer sort of perspective as to what improvements are being rolled out. What are the nooks and crannies of how this implementation is perhaps better used by this class of apps versus these, et cetera, et cetera. But then again, when you get to more of the front end facing businesses, which make no mistake are massive and are basically Web 2, you're not talking about those things. It's just more of what's the experience, what's the value prop, what can I do here, and who do I know who's sort of on here in terms of community or network.
Agreed. I love that, Kash. And I feel like sometimes that improvement doesn't have to be anything huge. I mean, it's a big company. It's not massive, but like Snapchat literally just had disappearing pictures. It's like in some ways that was uniquely enabled by Snapchat, right? And people bought into that. And like, what can, crypto or Solana do in particular that's unique? And I saw the other day, I think it's Adobe. They have this feature now called like icon transparency. It's essentially proves out, it's not just Adobe, it's Adobe and a few other groups. And it's like, if this is on an image, it contains the metadata of how that image was created so that like it's almost provenance. So who the creator is, if they used AI or not. I think that's a big part of it to show like, no, this was actually created by a human, which at some point probably will actually add more value to that. And that sounds a lot like a blockchain, right? But I don't think it is right now. And that is something that crypto would be perfect for, even though it sounds small, that could be really huge in the art community. So I think it's pretty cool. But Kash, before we close, can you maybe tell us a little bit about Hyperdrive? Because I don't think we've mentioned that on the podcast yet.
Yeah, for sure. So Solana, I think, has a number of innovations on a technical level, but one of the major kind of social innovations is just the amount of emphasis placed on these global hackathons. Obviously, many other ecosystems do this as well, but I don't think anyone else runs them as well as Solana or uses them as much of a Schelling point. So if I'm not mistaken, there's something like $600 million have been raised by projects that either started or kind of got traction during a hackathon. So the latest one, Hyperdrive, just wrapped up like a week or two ago, and I think they're still looking at the submissions right now. There was 905 submissions. It was the biggest hackathon on Solana ever, and I believe the biggest crypto hackathon as well, in the depths of a bear market, which is crazy. And I think there was two really interesting takeaways for me. Obviously, so Superteam uses these as an opportunity to like recruit new builders and really mentors who are very actively involved with a lot of these teams. There was two really interesting takeaways for me. The first one was the geographic diversity of where these applications are coming from. So the number one country by submissions, I believe, was China. Number two was Vietnam, and number three was India. I think tied with the US, right? But so you're seeing this like gigantic Asian presence, right? Nigeria was also in the top 10, as were a bunch of other like emerging economies. So love to see that the efforts that the community is doing are actually proving out. And we're seeing a lot of energy coming in from these different markets where the crypto use case is so much stronger. So that was really cool to see. And the second thing was that we're getting so many more like ETH builders or X-Polygon builders or XYZ kind of builders coming over to Solana. It really does feel like a lot of people are kind of disenfranchised or disillusioned by either high fees or the overly academic focus of other chains. And they really just want to build, right? At the end of the day, builders just want to make fun and cool shit that other people, like their friends and their family, can think is cool as well. And you're seeing a lot of that energy come to Solana right now. Famously, as you mentioned earlier, like this chewing glass mentality that used to exist on Solana, which was very useful branding and marketing when it was true. Thankfully, no longer true, right? Now it's kind of the era of surfing glass, as I think Toli said initially.
Nice.
Right? Where you have like incredible dev resources like Soul Dev and Solana Cookbook. You have projects like obviously Helios and Ironforge and Shift and a bunch of others that make it easier. Third Web. You have companies like Codigo that now use LLMs to like allow you to produce code with relatively little knowledge. And you're seeing the impact of that better developer experience in terms of the number of developers that are coming on and where they're coming from. And so I thought both of those things are really exciting. Hopefully there'll be some like really interesting projects that can kind of be the future of Solana as well. We'll find out in the coming weeks. But even just by the amount of energy and attention that it drove, I thought it's worth highlighting, particularly for people that aren't as involved in the Solana ecosystem.
Yeah, that's very cool. I wouldn't have guessed that's where the submissions came from, those top 3 that you listed. So love to see like the international effort in crypto, especially as you don't know where regulation is at in certain points. You know, like we have our own big conference called DAS coming up, and we're doing it in London because London, I wouldn't say is the crypto hub yet, but it's definitely embracing crypto in some ways that the US isn't. So I think that's super fascinating. But Brandon, Kash, thanks so much for coming on today. I thought this was a lot of fun. I can tell you guys have great rapport, and excited we put this together. I feel like we touched on some topics we haven't covered in Lightspeed yet. So I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Garrett. Oh, sorry to interrupt, but it's been fun, man. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Mert doesn't know what he missed out on, you know?
Yeah, where's Mert at?
Here, listening to the recording right now.
I always say Mert's gallivanting around, definitely not doing any work. I always say Mert, he like, wait, you know, we have a podcast at like 10 a.m. and he's like, I just woke up. And I'm like, it's because he doesn't sleep. I think he goes to bed at like 5 a.m. So,
and obviously he spends 3 hours a day shaving his head, right? So like that takes quite a bit of time as well.
He just shaves and tweets, dude. He's busy. Let the man eat. Let the man eat.
I don't know how he gets that many tweets out. Honestly, it's impressive. He will ratio anybody that comes against Solana. So, but the nice thing is that they're very thoughtful and informed tweets. So it's not like you just have somebody going around on Twitter, you know, criticizing others at all. But guys, thanks again so much for coming on, and we'll see you next time.
Cool.
See you guys. All right, I've got a little ending note here. First, thank you so much for listening to the full episode. If you really liked it, hit subscribe. But secondly, make sure you sign up for DAS. This is Blockworks' biggest institutional conference happening in London in March. I've included a link in the show notes and also a discount code. Get 20% off. Make sure to use Lightspeed 20 when you sign up. All right, I'll see you there, and I'll see you next time on Lightspeed.